Welcome to the Effortless Swimming Podcast. My guest today is Kenneth Graham, and Kenneth is currently the lead scientist at EO, which if you've listened to our podcast a few episodes, we had Brant on, who's been working with EO as well. They've developed this device called the SwimBetter, which I've been a part of as well, and gotten to know Kenneth over the last couple of months through working together on that device. So Kenneth, welcome to the podcast. And I mean, your background is a sports scientist, 14 years at New South Wales Institute of Sport, and working at a high level on the scientific side of things. And I've been really interested in how you view things, because I see myself as anything that's really scientific is above me. It's sort of, I don't think that way, but you're coming at things from that angle. So I've learned a lot from listening to how you are looking at things with improving swimming. And I'm interested to talk a bit more about that today for those listening and how that can actually help them become better swimmers. So thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Brant.
So let's talk a little bit about your background in elite sport and working as a sports scientist. What's the last 30 years? How would you sort of summarize it in a couple of minutes?
I suppose the best way is it's been so much fun. Basically, I've had the opportunity to work with some of the best athletes and coaches in the world. And through that, I suppose, be challenged as a scientist to come up with the best information to improve athletic performance, both as a scientist working directly with the coach, but also from a research perspective in terms of looking ahead at what's going to happen in sport in the next 3 to 5 years and what will we need to have in place.
You sent through an email a couple of months ago, just looking at how they have previously measured force in swimming. And you sent through this picture it's like an underwater picture, side on, and there's like these wooden looking boards under the water about 1 meter apart. And you said that's how they used to measure force in swimming? They
still do. The system is, the acronym is, or the shortened version is the MAD system. And what it does, it has a series of paddles 1.5 meters apart down the pool underwater, and they have a force transducer. So as the swimmer is swimming along, they've got to hook their hand onto the board and use that to push themselves off, and the forces are measured, and through the video we can look at the swim technique. The challenge is, obviously, it forces the swimmer into a stroke pattern that may not be their normal stroke pattern and their normal performance model.
And so I know how excited you were about developing the SwimBetter, about how it measures force and direction. It's obviously not attached to anything aside from your hands. So having that sort of information that's highly accurate and just gives this data that we've never been able to capture before. What was it about the device that sort of excited you and thought, oh, this is just so different to what has been done in the past, just from your sort of sports science background?
I think it comes at it from 2 levels. In other sports, such as cycling, rowing, canoeing, we've had force and power measuring systems. The SRM cranks are most known to triathletes and cyclists, but there's systems for rowing and kayaking. Swimming has always been, I suppose, the poor cousin in being able to have something that's easily usable in the pool and with rapid feedback. And this is what, for me, it was an exciting opportunity to work and develop something that allows that to happen.
Yeah, for me, when I sort of started looking at it, I thought it'd be so good to put some numbers and data behind the stuff that I look at on a daily basis with the underwater filming. And what is the difference between someone who, let's say they're swimming a 1:10 pace for an Ironman swim, which is a really good pace, compared to even someone who might be swimming like a 1:30 or 1:40 pace. Like what do we see the difference being with the force and the direction? And one of the things I actually found most interesting when I started looking at it is it's not about trying to produce more force necessarily. It's about being able to produce it at the right time and in the right direction. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you've been looking at with it?
Yeah, I think you've actually nailed it there. When we look at swimmers, and swimming has one of the biggest differentials between a slower swimmer and a faster swimmer in terms of the efficiency of the technique, so how little work a top swimmer is doing, but also the efficiency of the technique in that how much of what they are doing is actually in a propulsive direction. So where we see the technical difference is high-end swimmers, the good technique means that they're actually using a lot less energy at the same swimming speed. And when they aim to produce high power outputs, most of it is going in driving them forward down the pool.
Yeah, and when we do the breakdown, if you look at an individual stroke with the SwimBetter, you can see the percentage of propulsive force, so essentially force going back behind the swimmer. You can see the downward force, sideward force, and so on. And I remember capturing a fairly average swimmer with it, and the downwards force was quite large, and then you compare it to someone who is swimming really well, that you just see that significant portion of it being the propulsive direction.
Yeah, and I think that's the advantage of the quantifying in what directions of the forces are going, because to the person themselves, they're going, I'm swimming hard. And they're putting in a lot of effort. But it's not just what effort, and as you indicated, it's where in the stroke, and it's also reducing any of the forces that are actually non-propulsive or are increasing the drag.
That's why you look at a really nice swimmer, and it looks like they're putting in very little effort, and they can be when they're swimming comfortably, yet they can swim so fast. And the thing that I find, especially newer swimmers to the sport, to get them to take that on board is for you to go faster, you're not necessarily going to have to go any harder, or even, perhaps probably not even train any harder. You're probably putting in the same amount of effort as the person next to you. It's just that we've got to work on your technique so that the forces are going in the right direction and the technique is actually working for you, rather than just having the hand pressing out to the side, coming way under the body or whatever it might be.
And that's a challenge for a lot of people when they swim. The whole idea of, I need to slow things down. Slow your stroke down, work on getting the motor pattern, that replication, that practice, as opposed to, I'm going to get in the pool and chase the person in the lane next to me, or I don't want them swimming past me. You've almost got to get the ego away to focus on what works best for you technically, and refine your stroke to be as effective as you can. And then you can worry about racing the person in the lane next to you.
Yeah, someone asked me the other day, what's more important? Is it fitness or is it technique? And it's, well, obviously they both are, but technique's more important to start with. If you get an ex-elite swimmer who hasn't been in the water for 30 years, they could jump in and swim really well today. They might not sustain it for long because they haven't got the fitness there, but technique's the thing that's going to actually help them get the speed. So that's first and foremost. We want to get that right. And I think being able to compare swims with the SwimBetter, like, it's not a device that you'd wear for a whole session. I'd be thinking of using it for, like, let's say it'd be like a 100 test swim. You might do one at like a 70% effort, and then one where maybe you're doing it as a sprint. And then you might do that a week apart. Like, you're not going to wear it for a whole session. It's just a good way to sort of check in on your technique, see where your stroke's at, and you can have that ongoing progression with it. Is that sort of see how you see it being used?
Yeah, like for me, it is a feedback tool that you're using to get feedback, and depending on the individual and the coach they're working with, someone may do, I want you to do 100 meters. Let's check the data. Okay, now make this change. And what you're trying to do is get the person to associate the good numbers in terms of the SwimBetter data and the propulsive data with what the stroke feels like. And that's going to be one of the biggest things for people using the device, is that it's not you swim and it makes you better. It helps you get better, but you're still going to have to make the effort and feel the technical model and rehearse that and embed that in as a skill. Yeah,
there's nothing that I know of so far that can do it for you. You've got to be the one, changing your stroke and putting that work on a regular basis. And it's frequency of practicing those things, not time spent. So one thing that I'll try and get across to the athletes is, don't do 3 hours of drills and then don't do it for another month. It's the frequency that will change the habits for you.
And that's where the SwimBetter gets useful, because you can use that both with a coach or away from a coach to check that you are doing things correctly, and that you're learning to match the feel with the technique, both within a session and across sessions. And also you're going to get feedback. You're going to get to see, hey, I've increased my propulsive effectiveness. It's gone from 70 to 75 to 80%. And they're markers that your technique is improving, and they're the things as an individual, and not only people who swim, but one of the other challenges obviously is for the triathlete who wants to get out of the water, but not get out tired. And so that efficiency of your technique, that ability to save energy, even though you may choose not to swim any faster, is going to give you an overall better performance in the triathlon.
And just looking at some of the basics of how to swim faster, do you want to just dig into that a little bit? Like if we look at it in its simplest form, what can people do to swim faster?
I go and look at other people's videos, and I do use effortless swimming videos. I use the ones on Swimming Australia's site, and I've looked at the ones that have been developed by yourself and Brant Best. And what I think the best thing you can do is, if you can ever trick a situation, and I was lucky enough to do this myself, is get in the water next to a really good swimmer and try and mimic them, because that's the learning of the motor pattern. And I think, often what people do, if you can do it through practice and copying and mimicking, you can learn to improve better. And so, people talk about the catch and the pull and the high elbow, but it's really hard for a lot of people to conceptualize that. And I think seeing it, and that's why I think the videos are brilliant, because they actually explain to you what it looks like. And, with the SwimBetter, it's actually not only telling you what it looks like, it's actually going to tell you how are you doing it. Because so on occasion, people spend a lot of energy to look good rather than reduce the energy and be good.
Yeah, it's funny when I'm working with someone, I might say, oh, you need to come in a little bit more in this part of the stroke. And I said, yeah, I'm doing that, but they haven't changed it. So that's where video doesn't lie, but then especially with the data there, it's not going to lie. If you're still pressing down with your catch rather than starting to get it to angle back, or we look at the path of the hand, which you can track with it too, it's going to tell you where you're at with the path of it too. So it's really good to have that feedback of whether or not the change that you think you're making is actually being made, because our proprioception isn't always great, and especially in a body of water, it's often even harder to know where you are.
One of the things I've often done is to actually use a pull buoy, just because then you're actually now not even having to work on holding body position. So if you are working on the stroke, you can slow things down even more and really get it. You can focus on what things feel like, not there's so many things happening around me, and getting people to actually attend to the things that they should be focusing on.
Yeah, I'm massive fan of using the pull buoy, especially when you're working on your catch and pull, because your body position sorted, your legs, your hips, they're sorted. You don't have to worry about that half your body's taken care of, and you can just focus on what's happening out the front. And this morning I went training, hurt my knee last week, so I haven't been able to kick. So I just had the pull buoy in, and I could just focus on my stroke and my catch, and it was great. I had a really good session, and I felt like my stroke was going really well because that bottom half was taken care of.
Yeah, and it just simplifies where your brain needs to be.
Yeah.
And the same with the use of a snorkel, the same thing. Again, you're reducing the things that you're trying to coordinate to focus on the things you want to get the feel of, and then bring in the increased degree of complexity.
Can you talk a little bit about, I know you've worked with a lot of different sports, but that's obviously one, it's just simplifying the thing that people are focused on. What are some of those things that you've seen helping elite athletes make those changes to their technique or the way they do things? How do you try and get them to make the changes? Because for anyone, I think it's especially a habit they've had for a very long time, it can be difficult to to change. But how would you go about it? Like, yeah, what are the hacks there?
There's a few things you can do. One of the tricks of increasing proprioception. So you may even just use pieces of tape around your elbow so you get that stretch on your skin when you're in the right and the wrong positions. The full body suits were actually fantastic because of the compression and that they provided. They were really good at providing proprioceptive feedback. And we use compression in a number of sports to improve balance, posture, technique. But it is about, where possible, getting the person the opportunity to focus on the things that are most important at that time. And that's why the use of the pull buoy and the snorkel just reduce all the things you're trying to do. Your body's in one position and you can focus on the stroke. And the same if you're working on kick, using a kick board, and again, just focusing on, but again, don't try and race. Doing the quality work away from other people can be an advantage, or be the first person off in the lane. And so there's that competitive, I've got to work hard, disappears initially, and just keep building up, going faster with good technique and testing yourself.
That's really interesting. One of the things that I feel like I've pretty for the last year or so, I've pretty much only swum in a squad. Whereas prior to that, I was doing probably 75% of my swims on my own. And I feel like being in the squad, my technique's probably suffered a bit because it's all about hit the times, race, Whereas when I was on my own, I was just much more focused on what I was doing. And I think my technique was probably actually a little bit better. So it is good. And if you can combine the two, where you get that, you get the fitness, you get the camaraderie and, the racing and the speed in a squad, but have some sessions on your own. I've found that combination to be, really powerful.
And even things like doing some sessions short course, because you can use the turn at each end effectively to reset your brain to go back and, okay, I'm going to, on each turn, I'm now going to go and focus on my entry or my catch. Whereas people have a tendency for their mind to wander. And, but by breaking it down into shorter segments, you can reinforce that learning and that focus. Yeah,
absolutely. And in terms of we look at swim speed, right? It's a combination of stroke length and how long it takes you to complete a stroke. So your cadence, essentially. It's about finding the right balance, obviously, but how do you sort of look at that? And I know it's obviously different for different swimmers, but what's your sort of take on that? And where does your mind go to when someone's looking to find speed?
Well, one of the things that we've actually done over the years is periodically you actually do a set of swims of gradually increasing speed, and you can plot, from the speed over a known distance and doing rating, you can actually plot your stroke length. And so you can actually look at your stroke length against your swim speed to understand, where is my optimal stroke length, at what speed is it occurring? And that learning and that tracking again gives you that feedback on as things change, what's changing. So if I am swimming quicker, is it because I've actually got a longer stroke, or is it because I've pushed the rating up? So you're learning and understanding and always refining as to the reason that changes are occurring.
And it's one of the things that I don't think a lot of the athletes that I coach would probably understand that side of it. So what I'm referring to here is, let's say you're swimming 50 meters. We'll call it 50 meters. Let's imagine there was no push off the wall, right? So you're swimming straight away. Let's just for this example, let's say it took you 50 strokes to complete that 50 meters, and it was 1 second to complete each stroke. So it'd take you 50 seconds for the lap. Now that would be a stroke rate of 60 strokes per minute because it's one stroke per second. Now, if we just played with those numbers, so you got 50 strokes, let's say you picked up the rating a bit. All right. You did 50 strokes in that lap, but we went to I'm just trying to keep it simple for math's sake, but it took you 0.8 of a second instead to complete each stroke. So you picked up the rating. So just trying to do the numbers off my head.
1.2.
1.2.
Actually, no, if you've taken 50 strokes still, but you've upped the rating, you've either had to go faster or you've cut your stroke.
Yeah. So in this example, it would take you maybe 40 seconds. Yeah. So it'd take you 40 seconds for that lap if you'd increase the stroke rate. So you can play around with those numbers there to see what your resulting swim speed is. And like, that's kind of what you're talking about, plotting those numbers on a graph. Yeah. And so you can actually, determine how fast you'll swim based on, your stroke count and stroke rate. So it's fun to just like, I've sort of played around with that. I look at my own stroke count per lap. And if I'm swimming well for like a distance swim, I might do 34 strokes a lap in a 50-meter pool. And my rating, depends, sometimes like low 60s when I'm in training. And so you can play around those numbers and just see like, what do I need to do to get faster? And I think for many of the swimmers I coach, it's more increase your distance per stroke. That's improving your technique, which is reduce drag, increase propulsion. So they're like the main numbers that I think most people can play with. But you've also got the cadence, which is really important too.
And the other thing that people need to interplay is if you're doing gym work to get stronger, you don't do that away from swimming, because you've actually got to learn to convert that increased strength and power into swimming faster. And you can see individuals who will go and do blocks of training to get stronger, and they come back and I'm not swimming any quicker. Well, you actually haven't learned to apply that strength and power to your propulsion. And so you see people pulling holes in water, and we see it in a number, like in other sports as well, in kayaking and that, where people get so much stronger, but because they haven't spent the time of learning to apply that strength and power into the technical model, they're actually not gaining a performance benefit.
What you said, don't do it away from swimming. Like, what do you mean by that? Can you go into a bit more detail?
By not doing it away from swimming, it means that it should be integrated into the program. So you shouldn't just go and do a block of strength work and back off your swimming for a period of time in order to get stronger. The two need to happen at the same time. So I know of one Olympic sprint runner who used to do a gym session, explosive gym session, of about 80% of his normal gym session, and then go on the track and run. And I said, why do you do that? He said, I'm trying to get my brain to use on my running technique what I've been developing in the gym. And so that keeping it close, and it may not be on, that close, but don't just separate them well away from each other and say, I'm going to go and do 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks of gym to get stronger. Then I'm going to come back into my swim. And especially with the triathlete type models where people are mixing and dropping things in and adding things into the training, you do need to keep those things relatively closely associated, maybe within a 24-hour period, so that you are always learning and applying the strength and power gains to an effective propulsive technique.
Yeah, and that's where I think something like some TheraBand exercises prior to getting in the pool can help, or even just some stretch cord exercises working on your catch and your pull through. Because you're not, most of the adults that I would coach, we're not looking to get really strong with our swimming. Like it's muscular endurance, for a lot of them, but you don't need to be really strong to be swimming well. You just need to have good technique with enough muscular endurance to get you through your race. Because if you end up going from being able to do 3 chin-ups to 20 chin-ups, well, that might not actually have a correlation to faster swim times, and often doesn't for a lot of the events that the people I coach are training for. Obviously, if it's like a 50 or 100 freestyle, you do need to be quite strong. And you see especially some of the like the elite women, I think I've seen some do 20 or 30 chin-ups, like they're really strong for the 100 free. But it's a small segment of, I think, the swim population.
And those people are swimming with a very high degree of drag on the body. Swimming has that challenge. It's the thickest media that we exercise in. And so as you're going for a world record, to get that fractional improvements are big increases in power because of the viscosity of the water and the drag that imposes on the body.
Right. So that's why the sprinters are primarily doing that heavier weight work.
Yeah, because it's that very heavy power required to get small increments in speed.
And what about someone who's training for more endurance-based swim events? What sort of strength are they looking to develop, and how do they often go about it?
What you're more looking for, you actually are looking to be strong, but you're looking to train for strength without bulk.
And how do you, what's the difference in terms of the training?
The difference is, to train for strength without bulk, you've got in some ways two options. You can train very heavy with very few reps. And Olympic lifters do that because Olympic lifters want to get very powerful, but they don't want to put on weight because they don't want to get up to the next weight category. Or the other one is the endurance type resistance, but you're still trying to do it with the movement with speed, because power is about force with speed. And so in swimming, as you said, if you want to get your stroke down from a 1 second cycle to a 0.8 of a second cycle, you actually have to move faster through the water.
Mm.
And so there is that speed element to the movement pattern that you want to practice in your other training.
Yeah, makes sense. And so with the SwimBetter, what sort of data, like it measures a lot of things, but is there anything that sort of stands out to you, or a couple that you looked at and went, yeah, this is something that we've never seen before, or this is something that I think will be really useful for those swimmers at an elite end? Like, where'd your head go to when you saw what it's putting out?
At the elite end, the simpler data, the total forces and the forces in the three different directions, so the forward, backwards, sidewards, and upwards, down, that really can tell a scientist and a coach a lot about the mechanics of the swim stroke. And then I think coupled with that, and both at the elite end, but also in the wider population, the consistency of the swim technique. Because a consistent technique is something that you can more easily modify. If your strokes are all over the place and no two strokes are the same, it's going to be very hard for a coach to tell you what changes to make.
Mm. And
so working on that, the consistency of the technique and the efficiency of the technique, so most of your propulsion is in the direction that's pushing you forwards. I think that the biggest things that you'll get out of there in terms of the feedback model, and then there's a lot of other information such as strokes per lap and those measures, which are going to help inform you of, I'm getting better.
Yeah, so so primarily the direction of the forces is, and the consistency of that across the tested period, whether it's be 100, 200 meters. That's what you're primarily, looking at. And I mean, you see that, I guess, in races too, right? So those swimmers that can hold their stroke the longest and can hold it all the way through to the end will maintain their speed. But those that start to blow up, they drop off and the stroke falls apart where they lose their speed.
And we've seen in research in other sports, and especially in rowing, where they look at the consistency of the stroke model. And in rowing, you actually have an advantage that the oar has got a point of where it is actually referenced against at the rollick. But what we still see even there is differences in the consistency of the elite performer and the next one or two levels down. That the elite performers have a much narrower band of variance in their stroke.
It's interesting. So, and I would assume that would be the case with swimming, without having seen that data. But is there any other sports where you've seen that as well?
Canoeing, I see it. I've seen it in even Olympic sports such as diving, that you look at the consistency of the skill of divers to do somersault routines. The better the athlete, the more consistent it is, the narrower the variance. And that just generally means that they've narrowed it down to a model that is always a good technique.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about that. So if someone is going to the pool regularly, if you can start to make your stroke more consistent, so let's say most strokes nearly exactly the same, that is a good thing, and just looking to repeat that over and over. And actually, when I am working with people, say at clinics, we might get them towards the end of the clinic, they might be doing, say, 50% of their strokes in a better movement. Let's say they're trying to improve their catch. We'll often see them get, sometimes 50% or 30% of those strokes to be improved or different to what they were doing at the start of it. And then what I try and communicate with them is, keep practicing. And we just want to try and be more consistent with that change so that we get it 95% of the time, ideally 100, but we want to be more consistent with it. So it comes down to practice, repetition, but I think also just knowing that if you can just swim consistently the whole time, that is going to make a big difference.
And then if you are trying to make changes, you've got a good reference point to make any changes from as you require.
Yeah. And look, it obviously comes with time and practice and experience in the water to be able to have that consistency. So if you've been swimming for 6 months, look, it's going to take you a while to, I think, find that consistency, but it's a good thing to aim for. Any sort of closing thoughts or anything you'd like to share that you think would help the listeners of this podcast, which are swimmers and triathletes, become better swimmers?
I think the biggest things are consistency of your training, consistency within the sessions, trying to take the racing out of it when you can, and being very conscious and aware of your body. So, as your coach says something and tells you, do the rehearsal and even go to them, is that right? And if it is, remember what that felt like. And so you as the athlete are learning what the correct technique feels like. And the better you can feel that, the more you're going to be able to self-correct when you're swimming. And and technical improvement is about you learning to self-correct and refine your skill.
I want to dial into just one word you said there. It's feel. And that's one of the things that's, there's often a balance between thinking a lot when you're changing your stroke, and that it has to happen. You obviously have to think about it. But then once you have sort of thought about that change, try and tune your mind or your body into how does it feel? Because subconsciously we operate in sort of pictures and in feeling, not in words or other things like that. So if you can go by feel, that is what will help you actually improve. So kind of get out of your head once you've taken on board the change you're trying to make, try and get out of the head and into how it feels. I think that's so important.
And and that's the thing, that all the time, whether you have a coach telling you or whether you're going to look at the data from the feedback, make sure that you're thinking about your stroke before, and then you get to look at the data, because you're not going to capture that feel otherwise. So when you're running those 100-meter efforts and then going to look at the data or get feedback from your coach, make sure you're focusing on how the stroke feels. And so when you're told that it's good, then you go, okay, I now know what good feels like.
Yeah, it's that's great advice. Well, Kenneth, appreciate you being on the podcast. And for those listening, if you're not 100% sure what we're talking about with the SwimBetter, I'll put a link in the show notes. So you can look up EO or EO Labs SwimBetter. I'll put a link where you can find out some more details about it. But that's how we came to meet. And I'm really excited to continue to work on this project. And I'm going to be putting out a video probably about the time this podcast goes live as well, just about how you can use the data to improve your swimming. So thanks for being on the podcast. This has been great. And I love being able to chat with people like yourself who are working with elite athletes in many different areas, got a vast experience in different sports, and just learning from people like yourself. So thanks for being on the podcast, Kenneth.
No worries. Thank you.